J5LOVER, your #1 Jackson 5 and Michael Jackson fan, and today we're going to be talking about the Get It Together album. But before we get started with that, let's talk about this day in Jackson 5 history. Well, this day in Jackson 5 history, January 1st, 1974, the Jackson 5 are in the Rose Parade in Pasadena, California. Take a look.
The float that's coming up is the Jackson 5, riding the General Foods post-cereal division float. Happiness is the dawn of a new day.
Yes, indeed. The float is carefully designed to give the effect of a brilliant sunrise, slowly rising from behind the clouds as the entry passes the spectator. Then the sun sets behind the clouds as the float leaves the spectator. Unique animation designed into the float structure. And, of course, the Jackson 5 has provided all of us with a lot of sunshine, and they're singing their hit record, ABC, or at least that is the recording we hear.
Dick, this is one of those floats that really didn't begin to take shape until they put the flowers on. We saw it while it was being built, and frankly weren't too impressed with it. We went back yesterday when the flowers were on and were knocked out. A spectacular float.
Sunrise arches are fashioned of white roses, orchids, camellias, and baby breath. The clouds are of white mums, stock gladiola petals, vanda orchids, and carnations. Below, freeform bands of pink roses, orchids, and camellias, linearia, petaled on thin rods for the mist effect. Glimmer of sunlight is achieved by applying orchid, gladiola, and carnation petals to thin rods in color patterns, allowing the sun to shine through them. Thousands of roses and soft pinks and yellows of sunrise comprise the base of the float.
The dawn of a new day from Post Cereals.
I absolutely love how colorful that float is. I think it's really cool. I love that they were all dressed in like rainbow colors, and it was really cool to see. It's a cute little bit of footage. I kind of wish we'd had like an interview or something from that day. Yeah, and what's cool is, hey, the Rose Parade still goes on today, so it'll be happening again this morning, January 1st, 2025. Speaking of 2025, we have a lot to look forward to this year as fans, and I'm so excited about the Michael Jackson movie that'll be coming out later this year. And also, there's supposed to be an 8-part documentary that the Jacksons and the Jackson brothers will be showing on TV, probably Netflix or some streaming service, I'm sure. I can't wait to see it. I'm so excited about all these Jackson projects that'll be going on this year. I think it'll be a great year, and I'm hoping also to see more like Michael Jackson memorabilia, Jackson memorabilia in the store in lieu of all these things that are happening. We'll see, but you know, I really would love to have some great like Jackson merch out there. Okay, let's get into it. The Jackson 5's Get It Together album. This is a very interesting album. First off, this album was released on September 12th, 1973. And 1973 was a huge year for the Jacksons. I mean, this was like in the middle of several releases that year. I mean, you had Skyrider, which was released in March of that year. You had Music and Me, which was released in April of that year. You had Jermaine's second solo album, Come Into My Life, which was also released that year. And then you had this, of course. And then a month later, basically, you would have Jackie's first solo album released. And then the Jacksons' Live in Japan album would be released in Japan. And then, of course, the end of 1973, Jermaine Jackson married Hazel Gordy. So there was just a lot going on in Jackson world, but especially on vinyl for the Jacksons. This is one of my favorite album covers of the Jackson 5. My first, of course, being Going Back to Indiana with all the groovy, wonderful, beautiful, psychedelic colors and patterns on it. This being second, because it's just got this amazingly awesome like cutout, and you can see the Jackson 5's picture through it, and I just think that is so funky, so cool. And of course, the recent re-release in 2024, they did the same thing. They gave you the release with the cutouts, which I think is so awesome. If you haven't gotten the re-release, make sure to get it. It's also got like a red vinyl inside, which is really great. Yeah, what I found interesting with the re-release of this album from the early 80s is they fill this part in, the GIT, Get It Together, and it's just red, and there's no pull-out sleeve and no cutout, and you can't see the Jackson 5, and I'm like, what's the point of having a Jackson 5 album if you can't see them on the cover? Jim Britt was also the photographer for this album, and there's a lot of, great photos on the cover, on the back of the album. Obviously, this looks like this was the LA Forum back in '72. And of course, we know the cover was shot in late 1972 from the Jackson 5 show, which I love this. I think it's and the outfits were freaking amazing at the time. And I have to admit, I always used to think that maybe Skywriter was like my least favorite album by the Jacksons, but I did a review of that not too long ago, which I have here on my channel. And it's not necessarily one of my top favorite Jackson 5 albums, but I do like a lot of the songs on Skywriter. And actually, I hate to admit this, but as I was really reviewing and really listening to the order of this album and all the songs on this album, I have to say this is probably actually my least favorite Jackson 5 album. But the funny thing about the Jackson 5 is those guys could sing anything. They could sing a newspaper. They could sing a phone book. I mean, these guys could, it could be the worst possible song ever, and these guys could still make it sound amazing. So as far as the songs, as far as the way they're sung and the production, I think it sounds amazing, as usual. I mean, a okay Jackson 5 record would probably be a great some other group that's mediocre's record, because the material for them was picked out was really great for an okay band. But this was just such an interesting time for the Jackson 5 because they were still not able to write at Motown, which is something that they really wanted to do at this point in time, as well as the fact that the corporation, which was their hit writing machine in the earlier part of the 70s, had completely disbanded by this point. In fact, Skywriter was the last album where you kind of heard a couple of songs and a few of the members from the corporation actually still write some of the songs on the Jackson 5 album. This album is a totally different vibe. It's more like soul funk. They got away from that sort of bubblegum pop sound from the earlier 70s and were moving into a more mature sort of sound, at least more mature sound that Motown thought that they should have. For like the mid 70s, and because they were growing, they were getting older, they were in their teens now, so it's more like funk soul, which I like that sound for them, don't get me wrong. I just I think the songs, I don't know, I'll go over it as we go through each song. What was interesting is this actually was one of the least selling Jackson 5 albums. This album only sold 2 million copies. Their least selling album was actually Moving Violation at 1.6 million copies, which I find really interesting because I actually like that album better. But, and also this was a very interesting vocal time for Michael Jackson, as his tenor sound was a little bit lower. The register was a little bit lower, but you could really hear the voice change. But the voice change, I noticed Motown really tried to keep that sort of under wraps. And they recorded a lot of these songs like earlier in 1973. Some of them, I think, were even from 1972. Because if you ever, which I will eventually do a review, it's my absolute least favorite Jackson 5 album ever, is the Jackson 5 Live in Japan. The Jackson 5's Live in Japan album, it just, if you ever hear it, it definitely, there's a lot of kinks in Michael's voice. A lot of vocal changes, some like, some little, he was definitely going through that vocal change that a young boy at 13 so years old would go through. I definitely will review that album in the future, but I have to say, pre-warning, it is like my least favorite Jackson 5 album ever because the singing, Michael's singing is horrible. I'm just going to be honest. But what I find so interesting about that album is how great the brothers kind of fill in the gaps for him because of that, because of the vocal changes. And I think, Motown was obviously aware of that, so they really did not want to do any recordings at that time of Michael's voice going through that change. But I think in Japan, it was just so great not only to have the Jackson 5 there, but also have them doing, an album that they could have released, and it was kind of like theirs, so I'm sure that was really exciting. But getting back to Get It Together, I'm glad we don't hear that kind of stuff on this album. But one thing that we do hear is definitely a change in Michael's voice. Like I said, his tenor is a lot lower. Also, for me, I know this is weird, but like when I was a kid, I always thought he sounded like his nose was stuffed, like he had a cold or something. But I still loved his voice, and I loved his songs, and I loved the music anyway. But it does kind of sound like that, like, young Michael with a cold. All right, well, reviewing the songs on this album, starting with side 1, Get It Together, the first song on the album. One of my favorites off of this album. It's great, it's groovy, it's funky. You get that same vibe you got from the earlier Jackson 5 records of Jermaine and Michael singing back and forth. You've got the drums, and you've got the funky beat, and the song just makes you want to get up and dance, and it's just a great song. And to me, it was definitely destined to be at least a small hit. I mean, to me, it was destined to be a hit, but it was one of the songs that was most televised from this album that the Jackson 5 did sing on TV. I also love the horn section in Get It Together, that bum 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 bum. I mean, that horn section is freaking phenomenal. Next is Don't Say Goodbye Again, which is also another favorite of my songs on this album. I loved it ever since I was a little kid and saw the Soul Train performance on tape at the time. And just watching them perform that, I just fell in love with the song immediately. It's pretty, it's slow, it's got a very nice flute section in it. And I think Michael's vocals are very strong, and they prove well, and I think the lyrics are really interesting. Also, on Don't Say Goodbye Again, I love the way the brothers cheer in the background of the song. Don't say goodbye, don't. I always thought that was so cool. It's like they're like, like almost like a team cheering their star player on. I don't know. It just sounds so cool to me. The next song is Reflections, which was sung by the Supremes back in the late 60s. I actually prefer the Supremes version of this song, but I still think the Jacksons did a cool job. And I think on both versions, you hear like really cool, psychedelic, funky noises and sounds in the beginning of the song. I kind of like, I like with the Jackson 5 version that the song kind of goes, reflect, reflections. I like that. It's like really funky, or this sort of, I don't know, just these sounds, these really cool sound effects that I like. Also, what's so great about this album, and this song definitely reminds me of that, is how each song leads into the next. That was a very cool idea. And it was definitely a Motown type idea, because Stevie Wonder also had that done on his album, Music of My Mind, where each song kind of leads into the next song. And I absolutely love that Stevie Wonder album. So it's like really cool that they thought they'd do that concept on a Jackson 5 album, which I think is cool. And the last song, which I do have something to say about that, is Hum and Dance Along, which I actually love Jackie's vocals on that song. And I'm so glad he's like highlighted on the album. My only complaint with that song is it's like an 8-minute song. And if I was producing the album, I would say they should cut it around the 4-minute and 15-second mark. Because every time I've listened to it, I'm like, yeah, that would be like the best time to like end the song. I think it's a great concert song, and it was one that the Jackson 5 could easily wail on for about 10 minutes in concert. But it's not necessarily my favorite song on the album, but I think it's a good song, and I think it's a great highlight for Jackie, and I'm really happy to see him like get his vocals really highlighted on an album like this. But yeah, I just think they should have cut the song. Also, I think another thing about this album is there are only 8 songs on this album. And to me, most Jackson 5 albums had like 10, maybe 11 songs. And part of the reason why the album is so short with material is the fact that they have like 2 or 3 songs on here that are way too long. And that's not really the typical standard of what Jackson 5 music was back then. those songs were usually about 2.5 to 4 minutes. They were made for radio play. And so when you start having a song that's over 4.5 minutes, it runs a very high risk of not getting radio play. And it also, most people, their mind tunes out after so many minutes, even though it's like cool for fans to hear. And it's great in a concert setting because the music is just jamming and people are dancing. And then Hum and Dance Along was also done by a couple of other Motown groups, Rare Earth, which I think their version is really cool and very groovy as well. I actually love Rare Earth's version. And also the Temptations did Hum and Dance Along, but I really don't care for their version, and their version's even longer than the Jacksons. The Jacksons is a little over 8 minutes. The Temptations version is 12. Which I was like, this is way, way, way too long, Temptations, but it is what it is. I just don't think this song I think this song should have been shortened when they put it on a Jackson 5 album. All right, side 2. First song is Mama, I Got a Brand New Thing, Don't Say No. The song was actually first done by the Undisputed Truth, who I think is a great group, and I actually prefer their version. But I will say the Jackson 5 did do a good job on this song, but it's also not one of my favorite songs on this album, and it's a 7+ minute song, which I honestly think this song probably could have gotten ditched in the grouping of songs that the Jacksons had to do or had to record at Motown at the time. There were actually so many songs up for consideration during this time. I glanced over the list myself, and some of the songs that we've now heard on compilations and things like that later on, I prefer some of those songs. And I'll share a little bit more about those later. The next song is It's Too Late to Change the Time, which I actually really love that song. And we see performances of that song on different TV shows of the Jackson 5 appearances at the time between 1973 and 1974. I think it's a cool song. I think it's pretty. I think it's extremely relevant. I think it's still relevant today, you know, talking about how times have changed, but love doesn't have to change. You may, you know, not be able to recapture or get the past back, but you can always, a person can always change their mind when it comes to breaking up or getting back together in a relationship. I think it's a beautiful song. It's too late, too late, too late to change the time, but it's not too late to change your mind. I love it. Also, what's interesting about It's Too Late to Change the Time is Michael's sort of hiccup that he does. And once again, Motown really didn't like to give them much licensing or much play as far as doing their own thing. But his sort of too late, that kind of sound he did, he wasn't able to do that again until much later going into Epic Records. You Need Love Like I Do is the next song, and I like that song a lot. I think it's not my favorite for the Jackson 5 once again, but I think it is a good song. The song was actually originally recorded by Gladys Knight and the Pips, which I prefer their version as well. I think her voice suits that song perfectly, and it's just such a groovier vibe, even more so. And but for the Jackson 5, you know, it's some of these songs when I see them, and I know because I do sing professionally and perform myself, when I see them, they're more like stage songs. They're more like songs for a concert. I think some of these songs are not really album worthy for them. And a couple of these are too long. This would be like one of those songs, like a filler at a concert. I think it would be awesome. You know, you got Randy on the congos, you know, the Jacksons doing a little dance and beat because it's got great beats. The drums on this song are awesome. But yeah, it's not my favorite song for them. And last but not least, we have Dancing Machine, which of course is a freaking amazing song and one of the Jacksons' greatest hits. It actually never made it to number 1. It made it to number 2, which is crazy to me. Not only is Dancing Machine the most popular song on this album, it's also the most televised at the time. But also, on top of that, and it being the most popular song, a huge chart topper for the Jacksons off of this album, you get to see Michael do the robot dance for the first time, which he popularized at the time. And I feel that he was very heavily influenced by some of the Soul Train dancers, and he loved miming, and he was a big Charlie Chaplin fan. And I think combining all of that together made him come up with what we know today as the modern version of the robot. And of course, there were other versions along the way prior to Michael doing this dance, but that is the one that has stuck around that we know of today as the modern robot dance. And everyone loves seeing him do that dance, and it's just so cool to watch every performance. Every time you saw that, you knew what was going on. Overall, I would have to say my 3 top favorite songs off this album would be Get It Together, Don't Say Goodbye Again, and Dancing Machine. But, of course, I like some of the other songs, but those would definitely have to be my top 3. Oh, and It's Too Late to Change the Time, because I really like that song too. Top 4. Thank you guys so much for watching today. I really appreciate you following me and watching my channel. And of course, I want to wish you guys a happy new year. And tell me what you guys think down in the comments below. What do you think of my view of this album? What are your favorites off this album? And if you liked today's video, please like and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that bell icon so that you know every time I update and get a new video on my channel. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.